A heartbreaking plea in our last hour from a mother who lost her 19-year-old son to fentanyl poisoning. Critics say Biden's border policies are fueling cartels and the deadly drug crisis that goes with them. Our next guest wants to use military force to rein the cartels in. Let's bring in Texas Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, good to have you with us. Thank you for being with us. Yesterday, in the Homeland Security Committee hearing, Rebecca Kiesler, who is a mother who lost two sons to fentanyl poisoning, issued a call to arms. Listen to what she said.
This is a war. Act like it. Do something.
Congressman, is it a war? And if it is, what do we need to do about it?
It absolutely is. The cartels certainly act that way. Look, we've all been wondering, the cartels have been a threat, at least in Mexico, for years and years and years. And there was always a question, when does it really start to affect the American people? And I think we've answered that question. It's now. And it's because of the fentanyl crisis. They're poisoning street drugs with fentanyl. They do it in Mexico to tourists, but as this mother has shown, they do it to our kids here. Mothers have to have Narcan on hand, right? We're talking about legalizing test strips in Texas because everybody's so scared of this problem. So the cartels, through the Chinese who provide the precursors to fentanyl, are waging war on us. When you have almost 80,000 Americans dying each year from these overdoses, yes, that's a war. And so you mentioned my authorized use of military force, and that recognizes that fact, that we're indeed at war. But it does more than just people imagine just dropping bombs on Mexico. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about is giving our president the diplomatic leverage he would need as well to get the Mexicans to actually act on this. It does another thing, too. Our military can't even have the authority to collect intelligence on these cartels, right? You have to fix that as well. You have to have a whole-of-government approach to this problem. We have to recognize it as the threat that it is to our national security, to the American people, and deal with it. And this is just one of many steps that we need to do. We also need to have a better enforcement for cartel-affiliated people here. Mm-hmm. Here, the Mexican officials who support them. I have a bill that does that as well. At the state level, I think you need to increase penalties on fentanyl dealers. There's a bill here in Congress that makes it a death penalty. I think that's perfectly viable, considering you're poisoning people.
So there are many people who say, look, the best way to deal with this is you declare these cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations, and then you can use the U.S. military to go after them, whether overtly or covertly. Your bill doesn't go as far as declaring them to be foreign terrorist organizations, but in order to do this, it seems to me you've got to get buy-in from the Mexican president, AMLO, and Biden doesn't seem to have the best relationship with him.
No, you've got to use leverage against him. Well, let's address the foreign terrorist designation. Mm-hmm. Anyone who says it gives the military the authority to deal with them is wrong. That's not what a foreign terrorist designation does. It increases penalties here and there. See, my bill does that without calling them terrorists. Here's why you don't want to call them terrorists, even though they clearly are. But you don't want to designate them as that. Why? Because now you just made millions of people in Mexico valid asylum seekers. So you just massively increased our immigration problem at our border if you call them terrorists and basically say Mexico is a terrorist-run state. So yes, they are terrorists, colloquially, of course, but if you designate them as such, you're creating a far worse immigration crisis. So you got to think of the second, third-order legal consequences of doing that. That's the only reason that I don't officially designate them that in the bill. What I do in the bill is provide all of the extra authorities, whether that's prosecution, whether that's being able to sanction Mexican officials who aid and abet them. It gives you all of the same things that you would get for a foreign terrorist designation without actually labeling them as such. That's the reason why.
So back in the 1980s, the United States famously declared the war on drugs and started using military assistance to the Colombian government to go after drug traffickers and the people who were growing the coca and processing the cocaine. There were some notable successes, but it didn't really stop the flow of drugs. And until you start curbing demand here in the United States, can you really make a dent?
Yeah, I think that's a logical fallacy a lot of people talk about. Oh, well, the war on drugs has never succeeded. It's a waste of time. Let's just legalize everything and see what happens. That's nonsense. I mean, the war on drugs was, you're never going to win. You're never going to stop the human desire for what is eventually self-destruction, right, and getting high. Of course, you're never going to stop that. So when we say dealing with demand, that's more far-fetched than dealing with supply. And let's be clear about things like fentanyl and opioids in particular. The supply creates the demand. That dealer gets into a high school, gets kids addicted, and they overdose 20 years later. We've seen it happen because they're addicted for life when they get it young. So that supply absolutely needs to be dealt with. And that's also a concrete thing that we can deal with. You tell me how to change human nature and fix human nature where they don't want to self-destruct and take drugs, I'm all ears. But that's a fantasy.
So, Congressman, if supply to you is the key, why isn't this administration going to Xi Jinping and saying, stop sending fentanyl precursor to Mexico?
Great question. They should. Trump did that. He took the first steps to do that. But look, that's absolutely part of the solution. You have to be dealing with China, calling them out for doing this. They're an authoritarian state, and they'll claim, oh, well, it's criminal organizations. We don't control that. That's nonsense. They control everyone in that country. We all know it, and we should call them out. They're absolutely part of this.
All right. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, the great state of Texas, always good to hear from you. We'll be watching this bill as it makes its way through Congress. Appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thanks.